The fastest way to discover who sees the future is to watch who everyone laughs at today. The old garage sat at the edge of town like a forgotten memory. Rust stained the metal siding. Rainwater leaked through sections of the roof. Broken signs hung crooked above dusty windows, and weeds pushed through cracks in the concrete parking lot. Most people driving past barely noticed it anymore. Those who did usually wondered why it had not been demolished already. On a gray Tuesday afternoon, however, nearly 24 people gathered around the property. Real estate agents stood beside investors. Local business owners exchanged amused glances. Employees from Hayes Capital reviewed paperwork near a folding table. At the center of it all stood Charlotte Hayes, the billionaire CEO whose company owned the neglected building. Dressed in an elegant cream-colored business coat, she looked completely out of place beside the decaying structure. "Final chance," one investor said with a laugh. "Anybody want this thing?" No one answered. Another man shook his head. "The land might be worth something in 10 years. If the garage is still standing," someone else joked. Laughter spread through the group. Charlotte glanced at her watch. She had already wasted enough time on the property. The building had generated losses for years. Every consultant recommended tearing it down. Every financial report labeled it worthless. Then a pickup truck rolled slowly into the parking lot. Heads turned. The truck was old but well-maintained. Nathan Brooks stepped out wearing worn work boots, faded jeans, and a gray work shirt. He looked more like a mechanic arriving for a repair job than a man preparing to purchase commercial property. Several people exchanged curious looks. Nathan walked around the garage slowly. He examined the foundation. He studied the surrounding roads. He watched the traffic moving through nearby intersections. He looked beyond the building itself. Charlotte noticed that immediately. Most buyers had stared at the broken roof. Nathan seemed interested in everything except the roof. Finally, he approached the table where the contracts rested. "You are here about the garage?" Charlotte asked. "Yes. You understand the condition it is in?" "I do." One investor chuckled. "That place is a money pit." Another added, "You would be better off buying a lottery ticket." More laughter followed. Nathan simply nodded. He had spent years learning that noise rarely changed reality. Charlotte folded her arms. "What exactly do you see in it?" Nathan looked toward the road beyond the property. Freight trucks passed every few minutes. Construction equipment worked in the distance. New development signs lined several nearby lots. Then he looked back at the garage. Opportunity. A few people laughed even harder. One man nearly dropped his coffee. Charlotte remained silent. There was something unusual about the certainty in Nathan's voice. Not arrogance. Not desperation. Conviction. The kind that came from seeing something other people missed. She slid the paperwork toward him. $1,000, she said. Nathan picked up a pen. "That is fair. You are really doing this?" Charlotte asked. Nathan signed the contract without hesitation. Then he smiled and looked at the garage one more time. "No," he said quietly. "I am not buying a garage." The crowd watched him. The wind moved through the weeds growing around the neglected building. Somewhere nearby, a truck horn echoed across the highway. Nathan's smile widened slightly. "I am buying what it is going to become." This time, everyone laughed except Charlotte Hayes. Nathan Brooks drove home with the signed paperwork resting on the passenger seat of his aging pickup truck. The building now belonged to him, yet nothing about his circumstances had suddenly become easier. The dashboard rattled slightly as he traveled down a Tulane, Texas highway surrounded by open fields and fading afternoon sunlight. In his bank account, almost nothing remained. The $1,000 had represented years of careful saving, small sacrifices, and delayed purchases. To most people, it looked reckless. To Nathan, it felt necessary. By the time he reached his modest house on the edge of town, the sky had begun turning orange. The property was simple. A small home, a gravel driveway, a weathered porch. Nothing luxurious. Everything earned. Nathan unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The quiet welcomed him. Bills rested on the kitchen counter. Utility statements waited beside repair estimates. A calendar hanging on the wall was covered with handwritten notes and payment deadlines. Reality had not changed simply because he owned a garage. Yet Nathan smiled anyway. Later that evening, he returned to the property carrying a toolbox, a flashlight, and a folding chair. The old garage looked even worse at night. Sections of the roof leaked whenever it rained. Dust covered nearly every surface. Several windows were cracked. The electrical system barely functioned. Anyone else might have seen a disaster. Nathan saw possibilities. He walked slowly through every room, measuring distances, studying layouts, and taking notes inside a worn notebook. He examined storage areas. He inspected service bays. He checked the condition of the lifts and equipment left behind. Some machines could be repaired. Others would need replacing. He never rushed. Every observation had a purpose. Every detail mattered. Over the following weeks, Nathan developed a routine. He worked regular repair jobs during the day. Then, after finishing with customers, he drove to the garage and stayed late into the night. He removed rusted materials, repaired damaged walls, rewired lighting, cleaned decades of accumulated debris. Some nights he worked until midnight. Other nights even later. No investors appeared. No business partners arrived. No miracle rescue changed his circumstances. There was only effort. Consistent effort. One evening, a local contractor stopped by while driving past the property. He watched Nathan painting a wall beneath newly installed lights. "You are still working on this place?" he asked. "Every day. You know, most people think you made a terrible investment." Nathan smiled without looking up. "Most people are probably right." The contractor laughed. "Then why keep going?" Nathan set down the paint roller and looked toward the highway beyond the property. Construction crews were expanding nearby infrastructure. New businesses were appearing. Traffic continued increasing each month. The future was slowly moving closer. Because sometimes value shows up before people recognize it. The contractor shook his head and drove away. Nathan returned to work. As darkness settled across the property, the old garage stood quietly beneath fresh lights for the first time in years. It was still far from successful, still far from profitable, still far from finished. But for the first time, it no longer looked abandoned. And somewhere across the city, Charlotte Hayes found herself wondering why she could not stop thinking about the man who believed a forgotten building had a future. 3 months after purchasing the garage, Nathan Brooks stopped seeing the building as a project and started seeing it as proof. Every repaired wall, every upgraded light fixture, and every freshly painted surface represented a promise he had made to himself. Most mornings began before sunrise. The Texas air still carried a slight chill when he unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The smell of fresh paint had slowly been replaced by the scent of clean concrete, machine oil, and possibility. The transformation remained incomplete, but it was impossible to deny. The garage was alive again. Traffic along the nearby highway continued increasing each week. New construction projects appeared across the surrounding area. Warehouses expanded. Distribution centers opened. Commercial development signs multiplied. While most people focused on the garage itself, Nathan kept watching the roads. That was where the real story was happening. One afternoon, a delivery driver stopped for a minor repair. 2 days later, he returned with a friend. The following week, 3 more customers arrived after hearing about Nathan's work. None of them came because of advertisements. None arrived because of discounts. They came because someone they trusted had recommended him. Nathan treated every customer the same way. He explained repairs honestly, charged fairly, finished work correctly. In a world full of shortcuts, consistency became his greatest advantage. Slowly, word began spreading beyond town limits. Meanwhile, Charlotte Hayes found herself driving past the property more often than she cared to admit. During one visit to a nearby development site, she instructed her driver to take a different route home. 20 minutes later, she found herself staring through the window of her vehicle at the garage she once considered worthless. Several vehicles occupied the parking lot. Fresh signage hung above the entrance. Customers moved in and out throughout the afternoon. Charlotte frowned slightly. The numbers made no sense. The timeline made even less sense. She eventually stepped out and walked toward the building. Nathan was underneath a pickup truck when she arrived. "Busy?" she asked. His voice echoed from beneath the vehicle. "That depends." "On what?" "Whether you are here as a customer." Charlotte laughed softly. "I am not." A few moments later, Nathan rolled out from under the truck and stood. His shirt carried grease stains. His hands showed evidence of long hours. Yet his expression remained calm. Charlotte glanced around the property. "You have made a lot of progress." Nathan looked around as well. "Not enough." Most people would disagree. Most people only see what is already built. Charlotte studied him carefully. There it was again. The same mindset she had noticed on the first day. He always seemed focused on something farther ahead. something invisible to everyone else. As they talked, a freight truck passed on the highway followed by several commercial vehicles heading toward newly developed properties nearby. Nathan watched them for a moment. Charlotte noticed. "You keep looking at the road. Because that is where the future is." She followed his gaze. "You really planned all of this from the beginning, did you not?" Nathan smiled faintly. The garage was never the opportunity. Charlotte folded her arms. "Then what was?" Nathan pointed toward the busy highway stretching across the horizon. Everything around it. For the first time since meeting him, Charlotte realized something unsettling. Nathan Brooks had not taken a gamble. He had made a calculation, and the future was beginning to prove him right. Nathan Brooks no longer needed to imagine customers filling the service bays. They were already there. For months after purchasing the property, the once-forgotten garage had become one of the busiest independent repair shops in the area. Pickup trucks lined the parking lot each morning. Delivery vans arrived throughout the day. Small business owners recommended him to friends. Farmers drove in from neighboring counties. The transformation seemed sudden to outsiders. Nathan knew it had been built one long day at a time. The early morning sun reflected from newly installed windows as he opened the garage doors and prepared for another busy day. The sound of engines, tools, and conversation filled the building. It was not chaos. It was momentum. Around noon, a black luxury sedan pulled into the parking lot. Several customers glanced toward it with curiosity. Charlotte Hay stepped out wearing a tailored navy jacket and sunglasses. She immediately noticed something different. The atmosphere had changed. The garage no longer felt like a struggling startup. It felt established. Employees moved with confidence. Customers chatted comfortably while waiting. Vehicles rotated through service bays with surprising efficiency. Nathan was speaking with a customer when he noticed her arrival. He finished the conversation before walking over. "Back again?" he asked. Charlotte smiled. "I was nearby." Nathan raised an eyebrow. That explanation keeps getting less believable. For a moment, both laughed. It was a small moment, but an important one. The distance that once existed between billionaire and mechanic seemed smaller each time they met. Charlotte looked around the property. "You have employees now." "3. Planning to hire more?" "Soon." She nodded slowly. Most businesses take years to reach this point. Nathan glanced toward a service bay where one of his technicians worked. Most businesses spend years figuring out who they are. Charlotte studied him carefully. Every answer seemed simple on the surface. Every answer carried deeper meaning underneath. During the afternoon, she stayed longer than planned. She watched Nathan interact with customers. He never rushed conversations, never exaggerated problems, never pressured anyone into expensive repairs. People trusted him because he treated them with respect. That trust had become more valuable than any marketing campaign. As the day ended and the final customer drove away, Charlotte followed Nathan toward a storage area at the back of the building. The room was smaller than she expected. Shelves lined the walls. Blueprints covered a large table. Maps, traffic studies, market reports, and handwritten notes filled several binders. Charlotte stopped walking. "What is all this?" Nathan looked almost embarrassed. "Planning." She opened one binder, then another, then a third. Each contained detailed projections stretching years into the future. Expansion concepts, service models, workforce development plans, equipment investments, community partnerships. Charlotte slowly turned another page. "You created all of this before you bought the property?" Nathan nodded. "Most of it." She stared at him. The realization settled heavily in the room. The success everyone called luck had never been luck. The growth everyone called surprising had been anticipated. Nathan had mapped the future long before anyone else saw it. Charlotte looked up from the table. "You did not buy a broken garage, did you?" Nathan smiled faintly. Outside, the evening sun painted the horizon gold. "No," he said quietly. "I bought the first piece of something much bigger." Nearly 5 months had passed since Nathan Brooks signed the paperwork that everyone else had laughed at. The garage was no longer a curiosity on the edge of town. It had become a success story. Customers now arrived from neighboring counties. Local business owners recommended his services without hesitation. Delivery companies trusted his team. Farmers scheduled maintenance weeks in advance. Every parking space was occupied before noon. The transformation impressed many people. It irritated others. Success had a way of attracting both. One Friday morning, a local business blogger published an article about Nathan. The headline appeared on social media within hours. The writer mocked the idea that a struggling single father could build something significant from a neglected property. The article described his vision as unrealistic. His growth as temporary. His future plans as fantasy. By lunchtime, thousands of people had shared it. Some laughed. Some criticized. Others predicted his inevitable failure. Employees showed Nathan the article while standing near the service base. One technician looked frustrated. "Are you going to respond?" Nathan glanced at the screen and handed the phone back. "No, they are making fun of you. That is their choice. Does it not bother you?" Nathan smiled faintly. "If I spend my time arguing with people who do not understand the plan, I will never have time to finish the plan." The technician shook his head in disbelief. Nathan returned to work. Meanwhile, the article eventually reached Charlotte Hayes. She was sitting inside a conference room reviewing development proposals when an executive forwarded the link. Charlotte read every word. Then she read it again. What surprised her was not the criticism. Success always attracted criticism. What surprised her was how personally she disliked it. She closed the article and stared out the window overlooking downtown Dallas. She had spent years around powerful people. Investors, executives, politicians, entrepreneurs. Most of them worked tirelessly to convince the world they were important. Nathan never tried. Yet somehow he impressed her more than all of them. Later that afternoon, she drove to the garage. The parking lot remained crowded. Customers filled the waiting area. Employees moved efficiently between service bays. Nathan stood near the front office discussing repairs with a customer. When he noticed Charlotte, he finished the conversation before walking over. "You look concerned," he said. Charlotte folded her arms. "Have you seen the article? A few people showed it to me." And what? You are not angry." Nathan laughed softly. "Why would I be?" Charlotte stared at him. "Because they are questioning everything you have built." Nathan looked around the garage. The sounds of work echoed through the building. Customers chatted comfortably. Employees focused on their tasks. The business continued moving forward. "The people who matter are already here," he said quietly. Charlotte followed his gaze. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she smiled. It was not because the article no longer mattered. It was because she finally understood something important. Nathan Brooks was not building a business to prove people wrong. He was building it because he already knew where it was going. And the louder the critics became, the more convinced she was that they were standing in front of a future they could not yet see. Nearly 6 months after the day everyone laughed at his purchase, Nathan Brooks found himself busier than he had ever been. The garage opened before sunrise and often remained active long after sunset. New customers arrived every week. Local businesses signed maintenance agreements. Delivery fleets scheduled regular service. The property that many people once considered worthless had become one of the most respected automotive businesses in the region. Yet Nathan still behaved exactly the same way. He unlocked the doors himself. He greeted customers by name. He spent more time listening than talking. Success had changed his circumstances, but it had not changed his character. One evening, after most employees had gone home, Charlotte Hayes arrived unexpectedly. The parking lot was nearly empty. The setting sun cast long shadows across the concrete, while warm golden light reflected from the windows Nathan had installed months earlier. She found him carrying boxes toward the rear section of the building. "Working late again?" she asked. Nathan smiled. "That seems to be a habit." Charlotte glanced toward the boxes. "What is all that?" "Plans. More plans." Nathan laughed softly. "Always." Her curiosity finally won. "Show me." Nathan hesitated for a moment before leading her through a narrow hallway near the back of the building. Charlotte had visited the garage several times, yet she had never noticed the small room hidden behind a storage area. Nathan unlocked the door and stepped aside. Charlotte entered first. Then she stopped. The room was larger than she expected. Every wall was covered with maps, diagrams, sketches, photographs, and handwritten notes. Large boards displayed future expansion concepts. Detailed market research covered several tables. Growth projections filled entire binders. One section outlined technician training programs. Another focused on classic vehicle restoration. A third described partnerships with local trade schools. Charlotte slowly turned in a circle, taking it all in. "How long have you been working on this?" she asked quietly. "A few years." "Years?" Nathan nodded. "Long before I bought the property." Charlotte opened one binder after another. Each contained remarkable detail. financial estimates, traffic forecasts, demographic studies, equipment acquisition schedules, risk assessments, contingency plans. Nothing had been left to chance. You already knew where this business was going, she said. Nathan leaned against a workbench. I knew where it could go. Charlotte looked at him carefully. Most people thought you were taking a desperate gamble. Most people only saw the building. And you saw all of this. Nathan smiled. I saw what the building was connected to. For several seconds, neither spoke. The quiet room seemed to hold years of preparation, sacrifice, and patience. Charlotte finally understood why Nathan never argued with critics. He never needed their approval because he had already done the work they could not see. She looked around once more before closing the nearest binder. You were never lucky, were you? Nathan shook his head gently. Outside, the final light of day faded across the horizon. Luck helps people find opportunities, he said. Preparation helps them recognize them. And standing in that hidden room filled with plans for a future already beginning to arrive, Charlotte Hayes realized she was looking at something far more impressive than a successful garage. She was looking at the quiet blueprint of an empire. The 7th month began with an offer that would have changed most people's lives. Nathan Brooks was reviewing invoices inside the front office when a black luxury SUV stopped outside the garage. 3 men in expensive suits stepped out carrying briefcases and confident smiles. By then, the business had expanded beyond anything the local community expected. The service bays remained full. Additional technicians had been hired. Restoration projects occupied a growing section of the property. Customers traveled from several states away. Success had become impossible to ignore. One of the visitors introduced himself as a representative of a national automotive development group. Mr. Brooks, we would like to discuss an acquisition opportunity. Nathan listened politely. The number they presented was extraordinary. The offer included the property, the business, the equipment, and future development rights. It was enough money to eliminate every financial concern he had ever faced. Many people would have accepted before the meeting ended. Nathan did not. Thank you, he said, but I am not interested. The representatives exchanged surprised looks. Perhaps you should think about it. I already have. This offer may not come again. Nathan smiled. Neither will this opportunity. The men left without understanding his answer. Word of the offer spread quickly. Friends told him to sell. Business owners told him to sell. Financial advisors told him to sell. Even some employees wondered if refusing was a mistake. Then the real challenge arrived. A major highway expansion project unexpectedly began several miles from the property. Detours redirected traffic. Construction zones slowed transportation routes. Customer access became more difficult. Within weeks, daily traffic dropped noticeably. Parking spaces that had once been full sat empty for hours at a time. Revenue declined. New appointments slowed. For the first time since purchasing the garage, uncertainty entered the building. One afternoon, an employee approached Nathan near the service base. Are we going to be okay? Nathan looked around the garage. The question deserved an honest answer. I do not know. The employee seemed surprised. Nathan rarely sounded uncertain. Then what do we do? Nathan picked up a work order and handed it over. We keep doing good work. Across the city, Charlotte Hayes followed every development closely. She knew the traffic reports. She understood the impact of the construction project. She also knew many businesses would struggle under similar conditions. One evening, she drove to the property. The atmosphere felt different. Not defeated. Quieter. More cautious. Nathan was reviewing plans at a desk near the rear office when she arrived. Everyone is worried, Charlotte said. Nathan nodded. That is understandable. Are you worried? He considered the question carefully. Outside, construction equipment moved in the distance beneath a fading Texas sunset. The sounds of progress echoed across the region. A little, he admitted. Charlotte sat across from him. Then why do you seem calm? Nathan opened a folder filled with maps and development projections. He pointed towards several areas beyond the current business model. Because this was never supposed to be only a repair shop. Charlotte looked down at the plans. New service divisions. Restoration programs. Technical training initiatives. Expansion strategies. The next phase had already been designed. For months, everyone else had been watching the garage. Nathan had been preparing for what came after it. And as the evening light faded across the property, Charlotte realized the challenge threatening the business might become the very thing that transformed it into something even larger. The weeks that followed proved that Nathan Brooks had been preparing for this moment long before anyone else realized it was coming. While competitors worried about declining traffic caused by construction detours, Nathan shifted his attention toward the plans hidden in the back room. The repair business remained important, but it was no longer the center of his vision. One Monday morning, he gathered his employees inside the main service area before opening. Sunlight streamed through the large front windows while the smell of fresh coffee mixed with machine oil and clean concrete. Everyone looked concerned. They had seen the slower customer flow. They had heard the rumors. Nathan stood calmly in front of them. "We are going to build something bigger," he said. The room grew quiet. Over the next several weeks, new sections of the property began taking shape. An unused storage area became a restoration workshop dedicated to classic vehicles. A second section was redesigned into a training center for young mechanics looking to learn professional skills. Local trade schools expressed interest almost immediately. Experienced technicians volunteered to mentor students. What had once been a struggling garage slowly evolved into a destination. Customers no longer visited only for repairs. They came to restore family heirlooms, learn new skills, and become part of a growing community. News spread quickly. A vintage truck restored by Nathan's team appeared at a regional automotive event. Photographs circulated online. Enthusiasts traveled from neighboring states. Collectors contacted the business. Restoration requests filled the schedule months in advance. One afternoon, Charlotte Hayes arrived and stopped in the parking lot, surprised by what she saw. New signage directed visitors to multiple departments. Delivery trucks unloaded equipment. Students attended training sessions. Customers toured restoration projects. The property looked larger even though the land itself had not changed. Nathan met her near the entrance. "Busy day?" she asked. Nathan smiled. "They usually are now." Charlotte looked around in amazement. This is not a garage anymore. It never was. They walked through the restoration workshop where technicians carefully worked on classic American vehicles. Pride filled the room. Attention to detail filled every corner. Then Nathan showed her the training center. Young mechanics studied engines, diagnostics, and repair techniques under the guidance of experienced professionals. Charlotte stopped beside a window overlooking the entire property. "You planned all of this before the business even succeeded." Nathan nodded. The goal was never to fix cars. Then what was the goal? Nathan looked across the property. Employees worked confidently. Customers smiled. Students learned skills that could change their futures. "Opportunity," he said quietly. Charlotte remembered the day he bought the building. The laughter, the skepticism, the certainty that he would fail. Now she stood in the middle of something remarkable. The construction project that many feared would destroy the business had actually forced Nathan to accelerate his larger vision. Revenue began climbing again, stronger than before. New partnerships formed. Expansion opportunities appeared. The critics who once mocked him started asking for meetings. Investors who ignored him now requested presentations. Yet Nathan remained unchanged. He still arrived before sunrise, still greeted customers by name, still spent most of his day working beside his team. And as Charlotte watched the growing operation come alive around her, she realized the empire everyone thought appeared in 6 months had actually been built over years of preparation, patience, and quiet belief. 6 months after the day Nathan Brooks purchased the neglected property, Charlotte Hayes returned for a ceremony she never expected to attend. The same stretch of road that once led to a forgotten building now guided visitors toward a thriving center of business, education, and opportunity. The transformation was impossible to ignore. The old rusted structure had become a modern facility with expanded service bays, restoration workshops, training classrooms, and administrative offices. Vehicles filled the parking areas. Customers moved through the property with confidence. Technicians worked efficiently. Students studied skills that could shape their futures. What had once been dismissed as a mistake now stood as one of the most talked about success stories in the region. Charlotte stepped out of her vehicle and paused. The afternoon sunlight reflected from clean windows and freshly painted buildings. A large sign stood near the entrance displaying the company name. Around her, local business leaders, community members, investors, and journalists gathered to celebrate the official opening of the newest expansion. Many of them were the same people who had laughed on the day Nathan signed the contract. Nathan stood near the entrance wearing the same style of gray work shirt he had always worn. He looked exactly as he had 6 months earlier. No designer suit. No luxury watch. No attempt to appear important. He greeted visitors personally, shook hands, and thanked employees by name. Success had grown around him, but it had not changed him. Charlotte walked toward him and smiled. Quite a difference from the day we met. Nathan looked around the property. A little. A little. Charlotte laughed softly. There are people here from 3 different states. Nathan shrugged. We are still getting started. The answer made her shake her head in disbelief. Nearby, several investors approached Nathan and asked to discuss partnerships. Others expressed interest in expansion opportunities. One executive who had once dismissed the property as worthless complimented Nathan's vision. Nathan thanked them politely. Nothing more. He did not remind anyone of their doubts. He did not mention the laughter. He did not need to. The buildings around them spoke clearly enough. Later that afternoon, Charlotte and Nathan stood near the edge of the property overlooking the highway that had inspired his vision from the beginning. Traffic moved steadily beneath the warm Texas sky. New businesses filled the surrounding area. Construction projects continued expanding across the region. The future Nathan had seen months earlier had arrived almost exactly as he predicted. I have wanted to ask you something since the beginning, Charlotte said quietly. Nathan looked at her. What is that? She glanced back toward the facility. Employees worked. Students learned. Customers arrived. Opportunities multiplied. How did you know? Nathan smiled. It was the same calm smile she remembered from the first day. I did not know. Charlotte looked surprised. Nathan folded his arms and watched the activity below. I just believe that opportunity is often hiding inside things other people overlook. For a moment, neither spoke. The sounds of success carried across the property. Then silence settled between them. Not an uncomfortable silence. A meaningful one. Around them stood proof of patience, preparation, and quiet dignity. The people who once laughed had nothing left to say. The people who once doubted could only watch. And as the sun began to set beyond the Texas horizon, Charlotte Hayes realized the most valuable thing Nathan Brooks had ever built was not a business. It was a life strong enough to turn belief into reality.